Hi, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about supplementary aids and services, accommodations, and modifications. Kim and I are excited to share with you this content. So, I'm going to start by talking about supplementary aids and services, or SAS. When we're talking about supplementary aids and services, this is what the student needs to access the curriculum. So if you see down here the image on the bottom right, we have a classroom of students, or at least a snippet, a small group of students. And you see that the student who has an IEP is there in blue. And if you'll notice, every student has a computer, and so does the student with the IEP. And in this example, they are receiving their supplementary aids and services through their technology. So, some examples of supplementary aids and services include number lines. They could receive a reader, which could be through their technology or through a person for content that might be above their ability level. They could have a scribe, and here we've said the example is a scribe for brainstorming. We also sometimes use scribes, either live people or technology, for final products or for any part of the writing process. We could have a supplementary aid and service that's a use of worked problems or extended time. The supplementary aids and services always have to be focused on the student's IEP and their goals. So thinking about what does the student need to master that skill or strategy, and how is the student currently learning? Is there something that they need to be able to access that content? Then that might be a supplementary aid and service that they would need. Students have to use it in their day-to-day instruction if they are going to use an accommodation for testing. So those supplementary aids and services are used every day in instruction, and then on testing, they could use the state-approved accommodations. Typically, a student will need to be taught how to initially use those supplementary aids and services. So, for example, if we have a supplementary aids and service of a number line, then the student needs to be taught how to use that number line. So, it's often appropriate to have explicit instruction in or scaffolded instruction in whatever that supplementary aids and service is. And that would be part of their specially designed instruction. So if you'll notice the example in the bottom blue box, if a student needs a graphic organizer in the 5th grade, then we're thinking through, has he been taught how to use a graphic organizer? And he might have been, in the 1st and 2nd grade. But in the 5th grade, maybe the graphic organizers are very different or have advanced features. So if the student hasn't been taught how to use that, then we might want to consider if the student needs specially designed instruction in the use of that graphic organizer.
Thanks, Dr. Laura. We're now moving on to topic 10, accommodations. And we need to be thinking about accommodations through that lens of the IEP document. And so always refer back to the IEP document. You see it in the drawer over on the left side of your screen. That really will help you, and it has an extensive set of samples and examples of what we're talking about when we talk about supplemental aids and services, SDI, accommodations. It's a lot of letters, but here's what we want you to walk away with today. Accommodations are usually for state-required assessments, district-wide assessments, classroom assessments. Keep in mind that supplemental aids and services are these pieces, they're aids that we provide them with, as well as services that we provide them with. But what we really want to think about is when it comes to assessing students, what do we need? And remember, we're not only assessing students summatively, we're doing it formatively to help gain some knowledge. Accommodations, according to the IEP document, shall be individualized. And when we think about accommodations, our ultimate goal is to help them fade and be reduced when the students gain and demonstrate this increased knowledge and skills when they become more independent. So we don't want all these accommodations and services to be permanent, but they are there while the students are learning and they're needing them. The next piece that we want to look at is just like some examples. So if Jess has a specific learning disability, SLD, in reading fluency and math calculations, they might have a list of supplemental aids and services that are definitely more detailed than our accommodations. So for this specific example, remember, the deficit is in the area of reading fluency and math calculations. They may have something like a reader for text that is above the student's level, their ability level. They may have extended time for tests with passages or text content that have multiple or two sentences in a problem. They may need manipulatives and have access always to a calculator. That might be on there, but there might be additional pieces that we find. It might be visual prompts, previewing questions, advanced organizers, listening guides. There might be other supplemental aids and services that are listed. But when it comes to the assessment, the choices are limited to what are state approved. And so we see readers, extended time, manipulatives, and calculators might be on that state approved. So if you need to have some clarity, the districts have what they call a DAC, a district assessment coordinator. And so they're a great resource for you. Find out who that is and ask them specific questions, and also utilize the IEP guidance document. Accommodations, when we talk about for test, they're musts. These are not just if a student asks for them, because it used to be in the old days that we would only provide the accommodation if the student asked for them. Now we must provide it. So it's in the IEP so that it's not optional if it's listed in the IEP.
Thanks, Kim. That's some great information. And just one more thing to keep in mind when we're talking about accommodations. Several people have asked, how are accommodations different than modifications? And to put it in its simplest format, accommodations don't change the complexity of the content. They just provide access to the content. So for example, for a fifth grader who has a reader, the fifth grader would have the entire passage still read to them. It would just be read out loud instead of them reading the content. So that is an accommodation. A modification is simplifying the content. It is changing the complexity. When we think about modifications, often we think of students who participate in alternate assessment. So if we go back to that fifth grade example, now, instead of them hearing the entire text read out loud, and we might simplify that to 3 sentences and picture supports. So, simplifying content, making a significant change to the content is a modification typically used for students on alternate assessment. When we're thinking about accommodations, we're not changing the complexity, we're just providing access to the content in a different way.
Keep in mind that when we think about accommodations, it's got to be more than just a test. Remember, we're always assessing students. And so the balancing act that we have to carefully navigate through is encouraging independence, but and avoiding this learned helplessness. It's also about knowing when the students no longer need it, and then having that conversation within that ARC. Some will never be removed. Some will lessen over time. For example, when we talk about extended time, we know that there is real test anxiety. When we're talking about high stakes testing, this induces that test anxiety. And so having them on a time test can increase that anxiety. Knowing that they have accommodations that will help them that may never be removed, because we know that this situation can exist. It's just important that we recognize accommodations are part of the student's regular instructional routine, and they're not introduced or used only for the purpose of a state required assessment. Again, I would definitely talk to your DAC, your district assessment coordinator, if you have any questions. A lot to think about.
So, to wrap up our learning about supplementary aids and services, accommodations and modifications, we like to share with you an example, a visual, if you will. And this visual focuses on a day at the pool. So, journey with me, if you will, to your favorite friend's backyard pool. This happens to be my good friend Kim's backyard pool, and it is delightful. And so, let's say we bring our class here for a class party, and most of the kids have just jumped in the pool. They're swimming, they're having a great time. And in this example, the pool is the general education content. Most students with minimal supports can dive into any activity we bring, and they can happily catch on and start doing whatever the task is. But we've got 2 or 3 students, and they're sitting on the edge of the pool. They're kicking their legs a little bit, but they're not diving in. They're not independent swimmers. They're not ready to be in the pool by themselves. But man, they want in the pool because the pool is so nice, right? Cool water, kicking and playing ball. It's so much fun, but we're not ready. So we, as the adult lifeguards or the teachers, say, well, we'll help you get in the pool, no worries. And then we come at them with this ginormous, red, ugly floaty, and we're like, put this on and jump in the pool. And the kids look at us and they're like, no, thank you. I'll just sit here on the edge. And that often is a good analogy for students when they start refusing to use their accommodations. And I'd like to encourage us to think through this pool example and think through, have I made the accommodations and the supplementary aids and services attractive, right? Are they something that other kids would use? And I'm not saying that this is 100% always possible, but I would say 99% of the time it is. If you look over on the left, I have some examples. Younger kids wear these life vests on the bottom, this hot pink and purple one. They wear these all the time. So it wouldn't be a big deal if other kids are wearing them, right? And if we make it cool to wear those vests and say, we've got 10 vests over there. Anybody that wants to use one, throw one on. A bunch of kids, even independent swimmers, will be like, oh, I'll use that and float. So now we've got lots of kids using those floats and we've normalized the use. Now, what does that look like for supplementary aids and services and accommodations? A great example is those adapted scissors, right? I might have 7 pairs of loop scissors. Only one student with an IEP needs them as part of their supplementary aids and services, but I've got 7. And I say to kids, okay, we're getting ready to cut something out. Grab some scissors. And I offer up all my scissors. And some students will choose the loop scissors. So now it's an okay accommodation. The white float at the top, lots of kids will dive in and out of those floats, independent swimmers and not. And it's the same thing with reading passages. I might have a passage that I've got for students, and I might have it at a variety of complexity levels. And especially when we're thinking about nonfiction text access in science and social studies classes, I could provide texts in a variety of complexity. And my student who requires a reader might need the simplified version. Other students might also take that version. And guess what? That's okay because they're still getting the main idea of the content, and it normalizes that accommodation. So, as much as possible, when I think about supporting students, I try and keep that pool analogy in my mind and think, okay, I want to make this supplementary aid and service, this accommodation, pool worthy. So, what can I do to provide this for lots of students so that students who need to use it won't feel like they're being ostracized or separate, but rather this is just part of what we do every day in our class because we all like to be in the pool together.